Welcome, everyone. You're listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and hear from the innovators leading that charge. Today's guest is Aleksander Askeland, Chief Financial Officer of Manta Marine Technologies, a company at the forefront of helping fleets operate more efficiently while reducing their environmental footprint. Aleksander's path is anything but ordinary, from advising global companies at BCG to living and working in the Arctic to driving strategy across the Yara Group and now helping guide Manta through a new chapter following its 2024 acquisition. We're going to dig into the business side of decarbonization and the realities of scaling maritime tech and what it takes to turn vision into a viable fleet-ready solutions. Aleksander, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here and take the relay of your series.
Yeah. Oh, well, we're just really happy to have you. And what I love to start with is somebody's journey. Talk about your journey and talk about a little bit on how Manta Marine came about and a little bit about the acquisition and where you are today.
I can do that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm one of those people where there was nothing inevitable about my path. My first encounter with shipping was actually from the cargo owner side. And that's when I worked up in the Arctic in Svalbard, which is this Norwegian archipelago that is basically on the North Pole. And I was working for the coal miner, and we had to ship out our production of coal, and it all had to happen in 4 months in the summer with special class vessels and special setup and all of that. So I was really thrown into it. And then it sort of fitted with my general approach of I like to see how things are done in the real world. And so the constraints, just finding out how to make these operations work to actually move a few million tons in a sort of a short summer period, that was pretty exciting. So I think it was I caught the fever a little bit on shipping there. Moving to Manta was a bit of a journey through because it used to be a part of the big Yara International corporation. It's never was a core business, but Yara at one point wanted to establish a business area around emission control, emission abatement and emission control. And so they actually went on their own acquisition spree around 2014, 2015. They got into what became Yara Marine. And so I came in after a few years in Yara, to take charge of the sales and marketing for then Yara Marine. This was 2 weeks before the pandemic hit, perfect timing. But we then had the task of A, trying to continue our business in this environment, and B, we also knew our business then was scrubbers. We knew that this was a technology with a limited time span. So my incoming task was to then say, hey, we need to do a strategy review. We need to look at more technologies. We need to build a portfolio of technology. And that's really the sort of the starting shot for what has now become Manta and the Manta approach. So we did all that together with some former colleagues from BCG, I should add. And it was I would say it was a good success because we ended up with it pulling on a couple of different levers. We expanded organically, and then we also made some acquisitions of our own and started to build this portfolio that has now been divested from Yara. And the divestment process is these are processes that take on their own life, but Yara had been a good owner for us in the ramp up, build up of the company, but it was also clear that this was not part of Yara's core strategy. And that's really when we started to prepare the exit.
You bring up an interesting thing, and that's the strategy part of it, right? And I really kind of appreciate Yara's take on this. We have a need here. We're going to look at scrubbers and then pivot to something beyond scrubbers, like you said, because that had a limited shelf life. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is your role as CFO, because I will raise my hand and I will say, I think that most people think CFOs, all you do is you look at the balance sheet, income statement. You're basically a glorified accountant, right? And I think there's a lot of people. And as I've got to understand that role and meet people who have had that role at previous companies and not in the shipbroking side, but on the owning side. And I worked for a ship owner that was owned by private equity. And that really becomes, the CFO becomes the strategy kind of leader of that. Talk a little bit about what you're looking at now and kind of how you work through the acquisition part? Because that's also a part of what CFOs do. Yes, you're accountable for the balance sheet and income statement and talking to investors and the shareholders and all that part of it. But there's another part where you look at, well, if we do this, then our income statement will look like this, but which gives us the leverage to borrow money at a lower interest rate, or we could pay off debt and then leverage that. Talk a little bit about your role, particularly with the spin of a digital decarbonization company, because this is, a little different than old school shipping.
It is. And we're trying to bridge some of the gaps. We're trying to do, and we do, both hardware and digital technologies. And that's sort of, I think, in the longer term, we want to try and make this all come together so that we get more of a unified result from our portfolio. But yeah, for me, I think strategy is a key part of what I do. And it's not just because I have the background that I have. It's actually in a company like ours. We're sort of a mid-sized company, and we have technologies and we have an outlook for our portfolio that needs to be constantly maintained, right, to stay relevant. And so that's the starting point. And then I find that a key part of what I do as the CFO is to look towards the horizon, right? Because I need to find out, what's happening that could affect our current business model, what's happening that will be the next business models to take on in the commercial shipping space. And fundamentally, we also want to have a healthy growth for the company. So it's important to catch these trends early and we can talk about this later. It takes time before you have the very early starters to when you sort of get through this pilot and fleet phase until you get to sort of general adaptation of the technology. And we want to be a bit early, but that also means that we have to do it right, because there's a limited amount of lottery tickets you can put your money on. And that's really part of my job, right? Filter it out. Look at very broadly. Start with the sort of a blank sheet of paper, fill it in, and then gradually filter what is going to be successful. And then you asked about, the digital space. I think this is an area where shipping has been, I would say, late, simply because there's a lot of fragmentation in our space. But there's an enormous opportunity now to accelerate. And, we've all heard the buzzwords, right? The AI models are coming out. They can do more. We have, agents. And we are really now trying to look at how we can benefit from that. Because with our fuel up systems, we've been capturing high frequency data for almost 15 years now. So we have an enormous data set, and we have enormous fact set that we can leverage to try and get the next level of value for our customers.
And I think that that's interesting, because there has been a saying, at least I come from the tanker side, cargo is king, right? And I think I made a post a few months ago saying, cargo is a king, but I really think data is going to have a run at it. And I think it's for that reason, because yes, cargo's king, and companies like Yara and Glencore, and on the tanker, there are certainly Glencore on the tanker side, but then Chevrons, Exxons, Vitals on the tanker side as well. And you can go on to all the different asset classes. They have the cargo, they control the market, but I think there's also a lot of data that maybe is going to start playing around the margins of being a successful trade and a less than successful trade. And I think that that's where the data, 15 years worth of data that you can model and maybe just put it into an AI that you've developed internally that says, okay, give me the best outcome for these vessels based on this previous history is pretty significant for clients and for what you do internally.
Absolutely. But I have to say that I think this dichotomy is, I see it, but it's also quite overlapping, because the cargo owners, the charterers, they are constantly producing new data, and they will be the ones that we need to convince, first of all, but they will need to put it into their operational systems. And that's really our approach. We can only take it so far, and we cannot do anything that doesn't fit or they don't like, in a sense. If it changes too much their day-to-day operations, the change is going to be difficult.
Because then it gets into who moves my cheese, right? That's another theme that I think that this industry, and I think this industry has a lot more of positive history in it, is change management. The shipping industry especially always has to change, regulatory, or otherwise. There's a need to change, or more tactical day to day. Well, we thought we were going to this port, but I guess we aren't, and have to go over here. And I think everything from that example to, I'm just going to throw out, because it's my generation, OPA 90 and all the rules that came into that, and ISO, ISM, that's kind of where I, cut my teeth with all of those rules being implemented. That was a big change. That's just a change management point. And that's where I think it's going to be an interesting challenge. But one of the things, with your acquisition recently from Okapi, if I'm saying that right, in 2024, that should allow you to kind of, in a way, move faster and kind of react to, or, help your clients through this change. Talk a little bit about that acquisition and how maybe it's helped you, moved up in speed and scope of what you wanted to do.
I have to say that what and maybe we should have foreseen it, but the biggest impact was that we now had to just reaffirm and revalidate sort of the company identity, because we had identified quite closely with Yara, and now it was a completely different animal. Once we got over that, then we had to sort of make sense of our new environment. And yes, it's a different investor. It's more open. There is sort of, we now have complete responsibility for what we do, but we also need to move faster, because we are standing on our own feet. We cannot sort of run to Big Mama Yara anymore. Not that we really did, but there was a big comfort from having a corporation behind
absolutely. You. Absolutely.
Which is gone. The flip side, upside, I would say, is that we're swift. We're moving much more agile on our feet. We can take decisions quite quickly, and I think that to be successful now in the tech space, especially sort of if we look at our digital ideas, this is really necessary, because it is sprinting so fast, and it seems to be accelerating even at higher levels than we were anticipating 2 years ago. So this is all about making sure that we can find the gold nuggets and bring them to the market in a sufficient speed.
Right. And I think one of the interesting things, too, is when you have a heritage company like Yara, and we've seen this with other ones. I don't want to pick on my friends at Maersk Tankers, but they have a couple of outcroppings of digital and environmental companies. And I can even, historically, there have been other companies that have been backed by a broker or backed by an owner. And a lot of folks, when they're approached to say, hey, come use our platform, really, like, they're a competitor. I'm a little scared of that. And I know that that's one of the challenges that get when you have a spinoff and the kind of the company that's in the competitive space of the commodity or freight is backing it. There's a lot of trepidation, and I've seen that in a few different areas and a few different companies. And that must be, one of the challenges too, to say, listen, we're completely independent now. And one of the challenges to get when you go into the marketplace, for sure.
Absolutely. And of course, now we have a completely new name, so we have to start from scratch in that sense. But it's also, now we are truly evaluated for just what we bring face value to the table. And I think in the long run, that is the better option, because we're on a mission to find good technologies to spread out and make sure that we can get benefits across big companies with big fleets, global operations, different types of trades. So you want to have technology that gathers the same data that you can fit into your system to make sense of it. You can make the same kind of, emissions regulations are going to be the same regardless of what business you're in. So you're going to need to standardize. You're going to need to have reliable information that allows you to make the same type of trade-off, whether you're shipping a soybean cargo or a crude cargo or a whole set of containers. You need to be able to navigate the same trade-offs.
Talk a little bit about kind of the different areas in which you're focusing, and how do you talk to clients about bringing what you're doing to them? And I think obviously, I think all the clients know what they need in terms of an outcome, but getting there is going to be different. Again, you have some that are very, I think you mentioned earlier, technology, they're really embracing it. They want to be there. And some are, you're going to have to pull them dragging because they're still using paper copy, not even Excel, right? I mean, they're still using paper copy. Talk a little bit about your tech stack and kind of what you're doing, and how do you overcome some of the challenges of bringing that to clients, into the marketplace.
So I think what is common for all of them, before we even get into the business, we have to answer that. Can you help us become compliant? If they decide, and when they decide for us, then it's all about making it work. And that's where we really try to lean into, because we know that this has to work for the end user, it has to work for the crew, it has to be simple. And back to one of my previous points, it shouldn't alter their day-to-day operations in any significant way. And then very often we have to go through this sort of, let's test it first. Let's do a small number of vessels first, which is fine. I mean, we're there for the customer. So of course, if that's what they need to be convinced, we will play along with that. I think we have numbers now for our different technologies with installed vessels to say that it does work. And of course, there are nuances from vessel to vessel. There's nuances from operational model to operational model. But by and large, I think I would sort of strongly urge all of those ship owners out there to have, maybe sometimes a bit more of a leap of faith, because this has been proven again and again. We know that these technologies, they work. You have to find the one that is right for you, and that's and your vessel. But fundamentally, it does work, and we're running out of time. I mean, 2030 not far away. Is it 2040 even more stringent?
You look at all the fuel EU ETS, you look at, obviously the IMO regulations are coming out, and it's all kind of piling on the ship owner. And, I think you bring up another interesting point. Something that we talk about here is the burden or the impact on the crew. I think that's one of the more important parts of technology, because like you said, you want it to be part of their workflow. If you have something where you have to sit and come on board and do 3 half-hour classes to explain how to use it, I think you may have lost them there. I don't see that happening. Not that I've heard that other places, but I think you want it to be as seamless and painless as possible, because of all the regulations that crew have.
If you have wind-assisted propulsion, you need to have some way of incorporating that, transferring it, converting it to fuel saving. That's what we do. We take out all the manual work of the equation. You set your desired speed, you press on, and you go. And that's sort of, time to deal with all the other stuff that you have to deal with. And then you asked about the tech stack. I mean, I think we basically are pursuing 2 lines in our portfolio. One is sort of the hardware that you need on board. And then hardware, I mean that broadly. It means, you need a scrubber, you need air lubrication, you need shore power, you need something from the menu. We can do that with delivery turnkey. And then it's all the digital on side of that, because the additional value from the data is not something that they should be burdened with on the vessel. That needs to go to the shore. We're still optimizing real time on the vessel, but that needs to go to shore, because that's where you can take it to the fleet level and the portfolio level for the shipping operations. And that needs to be the next level of, delivering decarbonization value. You have to be able to extrapolate yourself or extract yourself from the single voyage and the sort of day-to-day optimization.
You touched upon a little bit earlier AI and MI, and I would imagine, and you don't have to give away the special sauce, although it could be an exclusive. I would imagine that AI and MI, with all the data you said you had some sensors, 15 years worth of data gathering, and some of this newer stuff maybe a little less. Walk me through kind of your thoughts about using AI, MI to augment some of the learnings, especially around, emission savings and reduction.
Well, I think that then ties in with my point on looking at this from a sort of your fleet level or your shipping portfolio level, because to really get the maximum, you have to consider all the possible ramifications there. And I think that's where we want to go. It's clearly, and that was the starting point for our sort of fuel up technology. It's clearly very important to optimize the engine at any given time, and that's been solved. And now the information has to be gathered, and it has to be digested and analyzed in a way such that it allows the operator to say that it's not. And they do it today, right? They do it they have it, all of this process commercially. They know if the business flips sufficiently, then they will divert the ship to a different port, as you touched upon. Maybe they should also have that same mental algorithm in place to do it for emissions as well.
Yeah, I could see that. I've spent 18 years on the trading side, mostly as a broker, a stint as an owner and a charterer as well. Generally, I mean, the last ship I fixed was 7.5, 8 years ago. So it was a while, but it would just have to be part of the trading thought. When you send a position list and you start looking at the different types of ships in terms of their emissions and all those sorts of things, people are going to start, I think, if not already, you start looking at that and making those decisions. I would imagine that's being looked at on the time charter side because it has a longer impact. You know, if I'm taking a ship in that's 18 years old or 15 years old, yeah, it's a good value in terms of the rate, but look at what it's doing to my emissions number. I had chatted with somebody recently, and they said, well, you could retrofit those older ships with, hull features that has a significant fuel savings. And I didn't even think about that, because you talk about the digital, you talk about other types of hardware, but actually retrofitting a ship makes a lot of sense. So these are the types of decisions that folks are looking at as well, because they want to get their numbers lower. One of the things that you mentioned is ROI, right? That's generally clear, but are you getting the sense that you did say also the time is now, that ship owners and fleet managers are getting a little bit of FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. Like, are we kind of at that stage, even though we are slower to adapt to technologies?
Yes, but it is nuanced, right? Because there seems to be one timeline for each technology. And we saw that very clearly with scrubbers. And they were waiting. And then, boom, they all tried to get in the door.
December 2019, I got 1,000 orders of scrubbers,
No, almost that bad. And there is something of that. And I think what I'm really hoping for, and now let's see if it happens, but if you would get regulation on carbon that is based on reliable data, and you could then get the market to value it, I think that's when you get into that situation when it's very clear what the trade-off is between installing a new technology and, going on. Because we have good business cases for our technology. You are saving, and the percentages do add up. Even though if you add up everything that's out in the market, you get to several 100%, right? But savings are adding up if you pick the ones that are relevant for your vessel. And we want to have some of those technologies. We probably can't have all of them, but we will work with the rest. But B, we want to provide the data. And we have the data. We've been collecting the data for 15 years, as I said. So we want to provide that data that goes in to, allow you to make that market trade-off so that, you have an efficient way of taking it out. And sure, for some vessels, 18 years old, maybe not invest so much, but then make sure that, you're buying into someone else who does, and take share, distribute the blame and the credit alike.
One of the challenges too that you look at in terms of, you talk about on a ship by ship basis, is scaling up, and you mentioned it before. And I think I've seen this a lot in other areas. Are you still seeing a lot of that? And then, how do you then communicate? You have to look at this on the fleet wide, not just these 5 ships. Talk a little bit about your process of getting companies to scale up beyond, let's say, an introductory 1 or 2 ships.
And the key here is really to try and keep everyone's attention, because as soon as people feel that the project is coming towards its end, mentally you can lose them, and not necessarily on the vessel, because they are focused on the new gadgets that they get, but sort of the project organizations or the sort of onshore people. You need to keep them, keep their attention as long as you can. We try to show that there is a benefit to setting up a program for sort of light vessels at the same time, because we can do the procurement much more easily. We can plan the project execution much more efficiently. And of course, if they want to have a safety valve to say that we want to be able to pull the plug after X amount of vessels, of course, I mean, we're here for the customer. We're not gonna sort of go against or disrupt what the journey that they're on. And they sell vessels, they buy new vessels, and it's a little bit back to this leap of faith comment that I have. That if you think that you almost know that this is going to work on your first 1, 2, 3 vessels, what reasoning do you have then not to do it for the rest? It's always a discussion. We do see that we get deeper relationships with customers now that the gains are, they are fully convinced and their crew is convinced and so on. But I feel that this is a returning feature of discussing with your customers, and I don't have a silver bullet for it, to be honest.
I think keeping that client engagement beyond the introductory thing. When I got into product management, we talked a lot about doing free trials. In a way, it's something similar, 1 or 2 ships, not a free trial. Nobody uses the free trial until the day before it expires. And I think that goes across any sort of product. That's something that I learned pretty quickly in my product management days. I want to shift a little bit to more of, let's say, your strategy CFO hat. And we talked a little bit about earlier how maritime has been very slow to adapt digitalization and technology, maybe a little bit more, especially if it's regulatory driven. They're adapting. Do you think from an investor point of view, obviously you guys have an investor, you've probably seen others in the space happening. Do you think we are finally getting the attention that maritime deserves? We are still early in the curve. I'll put it to you this way, being European, I'll put it into a European mindset, a football match, European football, soccer for you Americans. Where are we in this technology in terms of a football match? Are we in the first half? Are we halftime? Where do you think we are in terms of our interest from investors in our space in technology, overall?
Well, I think we're about to maybe kick off the second inning.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that, I think it's been a long, slow process, and it's been slow in sort of taking up the sort of very front end of digital technologies. But looking at the news feeds around, I would say there are news coming out now, people putting together funds to invest and consolidate in technology, trying to move a bit against the fragmentation that is out there and has always been there on, servicing ships with technology. I think that this digital wave that we're certainly not at the forefront of, but it's moving so fast that, we're getting caught in the tide here. I think that requires more scale. I mean, the valuations of these tech companies now are they're changing every day. Right? It's like hyperinflation. But it also means that the investments that need to go in there are getting bigger and bigger.
What I'm most enthusiastic and positive about is if you look at VC funds, I think it kind of starts with the VC funds. A lot of them now prominent, the DOC, TMV, Motion Ventures, Flagship Founders, they're maritime focused, not VC fund that's going to invest in a startup. These are people who have the background, whether they work for shipping companies or have that background that they really need. And I think that that's a positive, because you don't want to have investors that maybe don't fully, maybe get wowed a little bit with shipping and it's cool. And it's like, yeah, this is a long slog, man. If you've ever looked at an earnings curve and again, I come from the tanker side, there's a lot of down. The ups are fantastic, but there's a lot of you're just barely making OpEx, and there's a lot of that. I mean, you just look at the container industry, the run that they've been on since COVID basically is pretty much unprecedented in terms of their earning. You go the day before COVID and you look at container ships in terms of their earnings, it's not as nice as it has been. And I think that type of mentality, in other words, that's who you're selling into, right? Those people are, let's take away the regulatory. To change when you're barely making OpEx. I don't know if I'm going to do that, unless there's a regulatory need. That is a different story, because then you could have a conversation about that. But I think that having those type of folks involved in those that I've mentioned, and maybe a couple others, and I apologize, is definitely going to help and maybe move us closer to the second half, or I had somebody say, there's still the pregame show is on. We're not even on the pitch yet. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that for sure.
No, I do think that we're a bit more advanced. Promising signs. It's picking up speed. What I haven't fully seen yet, so this is, can we sort of bridge the gap, which is a bit particular for shipping, between owners and charterers? They both need to agree. If you want to put something on the vessel, the owner needs to agree because it's his vessel, and the charterer needs to agree because they're basically paying for it, in most cases. And that also getting better. I just think you see some of the charterers are quite at the forefront of evaluating tech and putting it to use. And they have the muscle.
They do. They do. And the one thing that I worry, because I did see this on a very small scale on the broker side when it came to recap administrators, there was a couple of these like early readers of recaps. So you had one group of companies use Group A, different group of charters use Group B. And who had to pay the cost was the broker. So every time you use it, it was like, they gave it to the brokers. It's interesting because I've seen that before. And the thing that I caution against is then they had 5 different recap managers in play. I know that that's a big challenge, which a lot of people are working on.
But I mean, we're trying to be a bit creative in our business model to make it easier for the charterer. I mean,
right.
One of the things that we really try to push as much as we can when we talk to them is, okay, we're willing to give you the technology on subscription, right? So that you don't have to do the CapEx up front. You can take it along the period where you have the charter, and then we can have a discussion. But, that's really to try and get away from this. We don't want to do CapEx because it's not our vessel, dilemma. And, I think they are getting their heads around, and I think we will continue to explore being a bit more creative in the business model.
Models have worked really well because it's kind of take what you need, and maybe that gets rolled out to what you're doing as well. As we wrap up, this has been a great conversation. CFO, you're probably traveling, visiting clients, visiting other folks, potentially investors, other things. What are you throwing in your bag these days to read? And again, I'm going to preface this by saying, it could be an audiobook. It could be you're writing something. What are you reading?
Thanks for the question. Right now, I'm finishing up a book that's called The World for Sale, which is written by 2 commodity journalists. It is a highly, highly entertaining sort of mix of the history, the development, the influence of commodity traders. I came upon it by chance. I was curious, but this is really, it's been a fascinating read. And how so few people, in quotation marks, can have such a big impact on the way the world turns. I feel it's gone a bit under the radar for the general public because this is a fascinating read.
That's about 2 or 3 years old, right? Something like that. It's not. Yes. It's mainly about Glencore, I think.
It's sort of. It has Mark Rich is obviously a key character in this, and then it develops into Glencore. But you find some other familiar names there that you expect to see, and commerce and shipping in particular, I would say.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Daniel Yergin about oil that he wrote 25 years ago. Same thing. People don't realize the impact. And I look at, even if you take the number of people that are involved in operations, shipping, kind of at the, picking up the phone and putting the ship on subs and then getting the documents, there's not a lot of people that do this, right? So if you think it like the whole 90% of everything, if you believe one number, 80% of everything, if you believe another number, so let's say 85% of the world's commerce travels by water. It's not a lot of people. That's like, you're moving stuff. And I don't think the general public realize that, okay, it's maybe a few thousand, maybe it's tens of thousands of people that do it, but that's not a lot considering what's going on.
No, absolutely not. And this is interwoven with politics, right? This is sort of instrumental in new commercial paths along the world. I mean, I'm sure we still see it today, right? There's always adjustments when geopolitics goes one way. Well, okay, the loophole opens up, and we move. But yeah, not a lot of people. There's a very concentrated top of the pyramid. I think everybody. But more people should have an interest in this because it does shape the world we live in.
The only time people care about it is if you're in the U.S. and you watch the Today Show and you see a ship stuck sideways in the Suez Canal, and then you just kind of wonder, when do I get my when am I going to get my toilet paper at Walmart? So I think there is that. Certainly, I think we've heard this before. Sea blindness. I know here in the U.S. it's definitely a thing that people just don't appreciate for sure.
Yeah, no, but that resonates with me. I have tried the -4 degrees seawater is your alternative to getting on the pilot boat. Then you stay quite focused.
This was a wonderful insight onto your history, the history of the company, and then really what you're hearing in the marketplace about the digital transformation and decarbonization, how they go hand in hand, how you've been evolving and how the marketplaces have been evolving as well. Thank you very much for coming on. I do appreciate it. And maybe we'll see you beforehand, or maybe we'll see you a couple of years in Oslo.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thanks so much for the conversation.
Absolutely.